room are different views, different ways of expression, different emotional intensities, and different roads that lead to conclusions. May we combine clarity of mind with kindness of heart, and may we be impartial without bending to strong personalities. May we sacrifice self-interest for the good of the whole. May we do our work with the love and clarity of vision for the benefit of those we represent. Please be seated. So I will call the regular meeting to order. And Ms. Robertson, we have no late items. Okay, thank you. We move to approval of the agenda and a motion to adopt the agenda.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Thank you. And there are the bells. So we move to adoption of minutes. We have 2 minutes to adopt. Item 4.1, which is the minutes from the August 15th council minutes, and a motion to adopt. Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Errors or omissions? All in favor? Opposed? That's carried. And we move to the September 6th Committee of the Whole minutes and a motion for adoption. Moved and seconded. Thank you. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. So we move to delegations, and we have, I understand now, Grant McKinnon, who's going to be presenting on the Community Options Society request for permissive tax exemption.
And I have to, I'm declaring a conflict because that is my place of work, so I have to.
Me too, I'm on the board.
Okay.
Do I point this way, or talk this way, or turn this way?
Whatever you're comfortable, whatever you're comfortable with.
Well,
Welcome.
thank you for seeing us today. My name is Grant McKinnon. I'm on the Board of Governors of, is that what we call it? Community Options? What's that? Board of Governors? Okay, fairly new here. We also have 5 other members from our board and 5 staff. Yes, that's correct. So I want to talk to you tonight. I'll give you a little bit of a brief background about Community Options. It's so successful and no one knows about it. And that's sort of how I got involved. I got involved through John Horgan because it's been around for 40 years. It serves several funding sources, primarily provincial, federal, and then United Way, Coast Capital, and various other private funders. It works with teens to 13-year-olds, counseling in office, dealing with anxiety, family conflict. It has youth drop-in groups, workshops for dealing with issues of suicide, self-harm, grief and loss, things with the alternate school, these kind of things. These are kids that sometimes fall through the gaps in our society. There's really no social services for them other than removing these children and putting them in some cases and putting them into the system. The idea is to keep these kids from getting into the system. So it's very powerful. It's spending a little bit up front we all know the costs of dealing with people in the system or kids in jail or any of these other kind of things we're seeing right now. So it's really all walks of life. Nobody's turned away. There can be doctors' kids or anything. It's totally not at no cost to any of the users. I know, like you talk about, like if I talk to Roger about sports, and sports can influence kids' lives and how they can be turning points, and you can take kids and otherwise going down a bad road and turn them good. And not all kids are sports kids, but it's the same thing, is that these are kids that are at a crossroad, and there's an intervention. And they can go this way, or they can go this way. And we can take those kids and turn them into productive, good kids and not give up on them. So that's the commercial. It's as far as there's federal funding, they're involved in 4 schools, 2 of which are in the Cowichan area, or in the City of Duncan catchment area. There's a mentorship and youth placement. There's a team of 15 counselors, social workers, child and youth care workers. Many of them commute to come to these jobs because they love the job. They like the kids that they deal with. They contribute to our community, bring their expertise into our community. In total, the statistics is that we serve 1,200 children, youth, and families a year, and the statistics show that 60% of the clients reside within the City of Duncan. although the services are extended to the entire Cowichan Valley, the city of Duncan is a center, and it promotes the social health of the neighbors and has a positive impact on the city. For all these reasons, we feel we fit within the guidelines of the permissive tax exemption, which I have a copy of your policy. Specifically, there's 6 criteria. Basically, they're a not-for-profit, they're not doing anything contravening the bylaws, provides services and programs that are compatible or complementary to those offered by the city of Duncan, benefit to the community and benefit to the city or benefit to the individuals within Duncan. So I know that you've had the committee as a whole recommendation to not accept community options. I have the list of the societies that you have accepted. I understand that there's community options and Clements Center and maybe one other that would fall within this permissive tax exemption that is not on the list. I guess the big question is we've gone through all the policy. We've submitted the application as per requirement by staff, and we turned down. And I don't see. I don't see that what the rationale behind that was. You have a policy. It seems to me now a policy of picking winners over losers or picking charities over other charities. And so that's my question to you for you to look at. I guess if I look at this list, I can see that there's a number of organizations, Girl Guides, seniors that cater to the entire valley as well that has been accepted. I think you have an issue with the Island Corridor Foundation that I understand there's some other reasons with why it's on this list, that it provides some sort of tax, or they would be charging you for crossings. I believe you put it on this list. Perhaps you should be looking at taking it off. It seems to me you've lumped in an organization with a bunch of charities. Maybe you should be looking, this is just a suggestion, looking at taking it off there and coming up with a different way of putting it on there. I think you're opening yourself up to a lot of scrutiny with an organization that shows a after-tax profit of $123,000 last year, including it on your list of charities. So I think at the end of the day, what I'd ask for, it's my suggestion to you, is you consider adding community options this year. We've gone through the process. We ticked all the boxes, did all the right things. I don't think any of you are probably happy with your policy, of your charity policy. Send it back and renew it and look at it again for next year. And if you're going to expand the policy, or if you're going to have a pool that is more fair to every not-for-profit rather than picking and choosing winners and losers. That's what I'd like to leave it with.
Right, thank you. Is there any questions from council, the delegation? Councilor Bruce?
Thanks, Grant. I'm a big fan of Grant McKinnon's. We were born in the hospital on the same day in Duncan, so our parents got us mixed up at birth, but I'm doing okay with that. And, I think that a review of our permissive tax exemption rules would be a good idea. I think what your society does is fabulous, but for us being new councillors, a couple of us looking at how the exemptions are given or not given seems very subjective to me, and I'd like some guidelines for us going forward. So I think your recommendation is a good idea.
But you have guidelines.
Yes, we have general guidelines, but it still seems it comes to council and it's hard to pinpoint who we say yes to and who we say no to. So I do support reviewing all that and taking a look at it.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Councilor?
Thank you very much. I have done a complete flip. And I know this is coming up for discussion a little bit later. So How many, can you conjecture, of course, because you probably can't say off the top of your head, but when you say you have drop-in, children drop-in, and you figure, what, it's 60% are actually children or youth from the city itself?
Correct.
Okay.
How's that number found out? Is that, or how do you, or are you just asking me to
I
clarify that?
just want to confirm that that's about the
That is
amount.
what I've been told by staff.
Okay.
Some of the staff here are, if some of them could perhaps,
We do record the addresses of
Okay.
these participants, so we do have a ballpark number that's
Okay,
very close to that.
that's great. Thank you so much.
Okay. Any further questions? Councillor Staples?
Oops, what's wrong with these things tonight? So I'd like to echo too. I mean, I know the work that you do in the community, and it's fabulous. It's definitely not a question of the work that you provide that council is discussing at all. I mean, there isn't one organization in town that, and there's a lot of them. There's more than just the couple that you listed. There's a lot of nonprofits in the city of Duncan itself, and they all do good work. But the 60%, just for clarification, is it Duncan addresses or is it actually City of Duncan addresses? Because those are different. Duncan listings are a lot larger than the City of Duncan itself because of our postal system. So that would be my question of clarification on the 60%. That does seem high for the population that we have of young people in our city.
Can I just ask a question about that?
Mm-hmm.
Is the reason that we're curious about that, is that pointing to if you're not servicing specifically in this area, then it has to be a certain percentage for us to be able to be appropriate applicants for this tax exemption?
Not to the best of my knowledge, but I'm just curious. I'm just asking for clarification purposes. That's all, just so that I'm aware of it. Because if someone else asked me that question and I said, well, Duncan addresses are not the same as City of Duncan, so it's a question that we could be asked at council. So, yeah.
No, I was just curious because I thought maybe there was like a piece on that application around like you need to have a certain amount of people that you service that are within this kind of city boundary, and that's why I was curious about it.
I think if I can just interject a bit, sometimes, I mean, we're the valley as a whole, and so the kids that are behind the school are being called Duncan, and that's what's being reported in the news, and it's a situation for us all to deal with the valley as a whole. Those kids may have North Cowichan addresses. Mm-hmm. They are causing trouble. They're doing whatever. They're causing you trouble within the town limits, and you're having to deal with vandalism and various other things. And sometimes some of these things, looking at this, is not how much we save, but not how much we spend or given a tax exemption, but how much we save, perhaps in dealing with those kids at that age. And I'm sorry, I forgot actually a really major point to make was that if we're granted tax exemption from the City of Duncan, the province automatically gives us the tax exemption for the school taxes. So it's a 2-for-1. It is a doubling, a multiplying effect. So the $4,000 exemption we're asking for you is actually $8,000. And the money from that can actually go into programs like dealing with some of this, the youth homeless program and some of these that we have been started being tasked to look after as well. So from a rational, logical type of point of view, you can justify it, I think, in with some of these issues we're dealing with in the valley.
So just further questions, because we will be debating the merits of the actual tax exemption in the agenda. So are there any further questions of Mr. McKinnon? Okay, thank you so much. And we'll be dealing with this a little further in the agenda. Okay? Okay, we move to the CAO report. So, Mr. DeVerta. Oh, we'll just wait for them to come back, yeah.
Thank you, Your Worship. My report's there in front of you, but I'll just touch on a few of the brief points. The 2nd Street capital project, the water main and systems are now complete. The storm and sewer are in progress, but delayed partly due to some soil condition issues. Paving is now scheduled for early November, so we can't do with much in the way of additional delays to still get to our paving for the early November. The Margaret Moss parking lot, happy to report that the study was just received, and the recommendations actually do include reversing the direction of the parking lot. So staff will discuss these results of the study with the staff at Margaret Moss prior to proceeding with the repaving and reversal of the parking lot. Next would be something I'll touch on is the pedestrian signals at Government Street and Jubilee. The concrete work, as previously mentioned, is complete, and the lights should be installed this week.
Well, thank you very much.
It's like a good news story this
That's
week.
a really good news story.
They're actually installing the standards today, this afternoon.
A couple other items. The first 2017 budget meeting will be held on October 7th from 12 p.m. to 5 p.m. and we do encourage people to come out and provide their feedback to council and to staff on those budget discussions that will be kicking off then. Lastly is the amalgamation study. We're in the process of awarding, have not yet finalized that, with the Citizens Assembly Consultant contract to a Mass LBP. An introductory conference call is being scheduled this week between the Council Steering Committee and Mass on September 21st. This group will then create the draft terms of reference for the Citizens Assembly for consideration by both councils.
Great. So if any questions from council, just hold those till question period. So we move on to correspondence and item 7.1, which is a letter requesting consent from the CVRD on bylaw number 4035, which is a transit service amendment bylaw 2016. And we do have Jim Wakeham in attendance if there's any questions, particularly from council with respect to this bylaw, but it's required that the individual members of the regional district, the municipalities, grant their assent on approval of this bylaw going forward. So are there any questions from council with respect to Mr. Wakeham? Councillor Horgan? Mr. Wakeham, if you wouldn't mind just stepping up to the microphone.
Hi. I did read, I think I read it thoroughly, the communication that you sent to us. I didn't see anywhere in there where there's an exact cost that it's going to cost the city for what you're after. I saw there was an awful lot of money there you're looking for an increase for service, but I didn't see anything that was broken down to tell us what we'd be paying.
If I may, Mr. Councillor and Mayor, yeah, you're right. That is a very good observation there. And the reason for that is because it's difficult. There's three reasons for that. This is a futuristic goal of ours to try and look at what are we going to be spending over the next couple of years. So in terms of when they'll come in and the amount per year, that depends on what items are approved at the CVRD Transit Board in terms of the transit functions each year. So there's a list of those initiatives, some of them are outlined in the report of what we'll look at. But in all fairness to you, if I was to give you a very high-level assumption and an estimate of cost per 100,000, I think that's probably what you're targeting. And this is very high level because we're trying to project how far out. And the other part of the costs with the service improvements are we have three different services. We have the custom, which is Handy Dart. We have the conventional, which is fixed route service. And then we have the commuter. It's a little complicated because the commuter is a different function than the other two. And the funding partners are different for each one. But if I was to give you an estimation of 25%, because that's what staff feel, of the total that we've put in here of 893,000, if there was 25% of those items that were approved by the CVRD Transit Board, and the other 75 would be conventional. With that in mind, you'd be looking between $6 and $7 per 100,000 of assessed property. That's based on 2016 assessment values. Does that help you understand?
A little bit. My math is right. And we're about if the average home is about 300,000, we'd be looking at $21.
18 to 21, that's correct.
Yeah, thanks.
But remember, that's also over the next 3 to 4 years. When it's not, best way to look at this is a line of credit, is a way of viewing it. We're trying to get an allowance for when certain transit initiatives get approved in budget over time. We have the ability to fund those and say yes. This is not saying that taxes are going up $900,000 next year.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, just also for clarification, the funding model between the partners in the region have changed substantially. It was phased, I believe this is the last year of phase-in, where we're going to a 100% assessment model, where it was a model of population, I believe,
Equal number of partners.
the number of partners, which has increased since Ladysmith joined, and assessment. So that model has changed substantially, so the impact it has on the city has changed as well. So we've seen our portion of that overall transit budget reduced because of the new model. Okay. Councillor Bell?
I was just curious when we increased that last.
Pardon me?
When was that increase last? When was the last time there was an increase?
Ooh, that's a good question. Well, you know, I didn't even bring that with me, but I'm going to say it's in excess of at least 5 years. I'm thinking, in all fairness, that the last change we made to the bylaw was when Ladysmith joined the transit service, but I don't believe the tax requisition limit was increased at that time.
Okay. Any other questions, Mr. Wakeham? Okay, so we have a recommendation here that Council of the City of Duncan consent to the adoption of CBRD bylaw number 4035, Transit Service Amendment Bylaw number 2016. Okay, moved, and a seconder, thank you. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Opposed, Councillor Horgan. And if you'd mark that on the agenda. And thank you, Mr. Wakeham. Okay, that motion passes. So we move to reports of committee, and we start with recommendations of the committee of the whole, and I'll turn the meeting over at this moment to Councillor Jackson as the deputy mayor. I'm going to put forward a conflict of interest for the Island Quarter Foundation, as I sit as on the board of directors of that.
I also have a conflict, so I'll step out as well. Family member on the ICF.
Okay, so the motion on the table, or it's not on the table yet, but the motion is that council give the first 3 readings to permissive tax exemption bylaw 3151-2016, a bylaw to provide a permissive tax exemption for the Island Corridor Foundation. Do I have a mover for that? Moved, seconded. Any discussion? So this is land that is adjacent to the railroad tracks that takes in, correct me if I'm wrong, part of our parking lot, the museum, and part of Charles Hoey Park.
Correct.
Okay. No discussion? Okay. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you very much.
So should I excuse myself now?
We have to say what we're
Well, wait.
doing first before you can excuse yourself.
Okay. Dive to get out of here.
Yeah. Okay, so we're at 8.1.2.
Thank you.
I'm gonna
Okay, 8.12, I know we have a couple of declared conflicts, so if they'd like to put those forward, please.
I'm declaring a conflict because it's my place of employment.
And I'm on the board. Thank you.
So this is with respect to bylaw 3152, the permissive tax exemption for Community Options Society. And the motion forward for council is that council deny giving the first three readings of the permissive tax exemption bylaw number 3152, 2016, a bylaw to provide for a permissive tax exemption for the Community Options Society. And is there a mover? Moved, seconder. Okay, second. And discussion on the motion? Councillor Staples?
So I actually would like to vote against this motion. I've been thinking a lot about this since last week. Well, not a lot, but I've been thinking about it. And just thinking about our entire tax exemption process and about how we definitely need to address it, which we've already discussed as a council, and we've already established that that's something that's a priority to us moving forward. But thinking about the crisis that our community is under right now, that's part of what has made me change my mind on this, because I feel like we're actually being responsive to something that's happening in our community that's been accelerating this summer. And I feel like an extra $8,000 for an organization to put towards programming is important at this time. I feel that there are times when we do have to look at what's going on in our community when we decide on exemptions, and that's something that we haven't maybe had as much standing out as this issue has been. And so I will vote to defeat the motion on the floor and support giving the tax exemption this year. Not saying that will happen every year, because there are other organizations that we will have to respond to in the future as well. But in terms of what this could do for what we need right now, I think it's important.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Jackson?
Yeah, thank you very much. I, too, agree with Councillor Staples. If council gets to choose who they give permissive tax exemption to, other than churches, which is provincially mandated. So we've got the golden not-for-profit people who have found favor with the council, and that's legislatively correct, but it's not necessarily legislatively fair, in my opinion. So I, too, have given this a great deal of thought. It's $4,000, but it equates to $8,000 in money for future programming that will go towards children and youth. If we look at the numbers, so if there are 372 youth that are helped, that equates to, if there's 620 youth that are helped, 60% of them, which is 372, come from the city of Duncan. And then, as they said in their report, it's not just 620, but also a parent, a caregiver, or something like that. So there's somewhere in the neighborhood of almost 700 people actually from the city who are helped by this organization. For a council that has claimed to be youth-oriented and doing youth outreach, this is critical. And I don't necessarily want to pick on any one organization, but for instance, we've got some actual facts here from Community Options Society, but I just want to say off the top of my head, the Duncan Elks, they send children to camps. The camp is in Shuswap Lake or in Aldergrove or on Denman Island, and I can just bet you that the local Elks don't send 372 children to camp from the city of Duncan, and yet we're giving them a permissive tax exemption. So we really do have to, and it's obviously not going to happen tonight, look again at the reasons why we grant these and the information that they give us, which I feel perfectly confident about the Community Options Society, that in a time of youth crisis, I am going to support giving them the money, and I'm going to be voting against this motion. Thank you.
I agree with everything that was just said by both councillors, but going forward after this year, I would like to do a full review of our permissive tax exemption, just so we're not put in these predicaments where we're picking favorites on, because there's lots of good organizations. So, thank you.
Councillor Staples?
Yeah, I would just like to clarify, just from my point of view, that I don't feel like that's been something that, since I've been on this council, and I can't speak for before that, where it has been a sense of picking favorites or not. I mean, we made a decision as a council not to approve more tax exemptions. That was a decision that we all made and we all agreed upon. What I recognize that in that decision, and that we were going to review it. That's a decision we made last year. And so I don't want to get into, I guess, that picking favorites or who's better or deserving or any of that. Because to me, it's looking at, okay, when we made that decision, we didn't have the crisis that we have right now at the level that we have it right now. So that's what we're responding to, and that's part of our job here. So that's why I'm changing my decision. So thank you.
So I'll take a moment here. I am actually supportive of the denial, and that may seem counterintuitive with respect to what the Community Option Society does, and I'm quite familiar with what they've done. I've been across the street for them for 40 years and know many of the people who have been involved for a very, very long time, and I respect many of the board members that are sitting here and other staff here today. The decision wasn't made on trying to favor one or the other. We have a tremendous amount of nonprofit and service giving groups centered in the city of Duncan because we're the urban core. One of the challenges I have is expansion overall of our tax exemptions. We provide a number of them. They are for very different reasons. I know that others were brought up here with respect to what and the circumstances are very unique in many of these cases. We had actually had a policy previously that we weren't going to expand tax exemptions further. The challenge with that, challenge with us in the city having to provide many services for many people outside of the area that actually contribute to the tax base, is challenging. We have a budget which is constrained. We have many requests and many things that we have to provide for a great deal of stakeholders and citizens, and so we certainly don't do it on trying to pick one winner or one person who's doing better service than another. They're all, and most of them don't get tax exemptions. They're all providing good service. When I looked over the budget of the COS, I see that it is substantially funded through the provincial government. One of the decisions that drove my idea was that that those services are being funded through the province in a substantial way. I know there are other supports you can do to add more services to what you do. We had a similar situation with Margaret Moss where we were providing the province essentially subsidy for a use of a building which had a regional mandate and was funded. The services were funded through the provincial government, but it was the city that was picking up, not getting any lease rate from them, providing the building and land for $1, and providing a subsidy to those services which served many other people in the region. So I just felt that being responsible to our taxpayers specifically, that expanding more of these grants, they have an impact on the city's budget, and that means we provide less services to our citizens directly. So also buildings which are in commercial lease areas, we have a fairly healthy commercial tax base, but it's also limited, and it's one of the areas where we derive a reasonable amount of income towards the city budget. So my vote will not be with respect to the service that the Community Option Society provides, and I know they've provided for a very, very long time and how important it is. I know all about those things. I chair Success by Six. I have a lot of empathy for intervention early with respect to how people go and how much it costs the system as we go on if we don't deal with those. So I give you full credit for the work that's been done over those years. So that's my only comment at this point, and unless there's anything new, I will take the question.
Yes, I would like to add something.
Okay, Councillor Jackson.
I certainly don't disagree with you. I think that every town within a regional district probably suffers the same thing, like Nelson and Cranbrook and Courtenay and Campbell River, and the only, just off the top of my head. So it's not like we can go to the CVRD and say, could you give us a little bit of money because we're funding out of the city regional services. However, we've got the Sea Wave, the Women's House, Kiwanis, Duncan Manor, Growing Together, Independent Living, those are all regional services. So, and I think that every smaller town within a greater regional district faces the same challenges, and we just have to realize that we're not the only one. And I don't disagree with you, but I also want to agree with Councillor Staples that we are in a time of crisis, and I also agree with Councillor Bruce that we have to look at this a lot more closely in the months to come before this comes around again. But I still think that this should be turned down and that we should allow them a property tax exemption.
Okay, I'm going to call the question. All those in favor of the motion? And those opposed? And the motion is defeated. Okay, thank you. Do you want to do that if the motion's, yes, because we'd need one to assent to it. So we would reverse this motion that council give 3 readings to the permissive tax exemption bylaw number 3152/2016, a bylaw to provide a permissive tax exemption for the Community Option Society.
So moved.
Moved, seconded, thank you.
And again, to just for clarity, if we weren't in the situation that we were in, I would have stuck with my original decision about not approving tax exemptions, because we will have, and I mean, we always do have other organizations who will come to us and is the same thing that you did in your presentation, say, well, what about these guys getting this, and what about this? But I actually feel that today I have a reason that I've done this. It hasn't been for any other reason other than what's happening in our community, because every time we do something like this, we are essentially taking away from someone else. So I just wanted to say that, and again, thank you for the work that you do.
Okay, I'm going to call the question then. All those in favor? Opposed? None opposed, thank you. And thank you. So for your part of the meeting, I don't expect you, unless you'd like to stay for the rest of a riveting meeting.
Watch on TV.
I'm sure you will.
Thank you. Thanks, guys.
Okay.
You're most welcome.
So you just changed the wording on that?
Well, we already voted on that when it got defeated, and now you make a new motion and it.
But you just changed the wording from what was here, because the only thing I did was scratch out the word deny and put give.
That's what we just did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I have to do 2 separate motions.
Yes. She's probably visiting with her group. Can we just carry on then if she's?
Yes, we've got
Okay,
4 now.
thank you. So we go on to bylaw number 3153, which is the permissive tax exemption general, which is the council give 3 readings, give a 3-year property tax exemption for the Duncan Christian Reformed Church, and that council deny the Duncan Housing Society's request for an additional exemption of from 50% to 100% for 5 years, commencing in 2016, with no option to renew or for a further 5 years. With an option to renew for the further 5 years for non-leased area of 280 First Street. And that council give 3 readings to the permissive tax exemption bylaw number 3153/2016.
So moved.
Moved, seconder, okay. Any discussion? Councillor Jackson?
It's just a question through you to Mr. DeVertai. Although maybe this should be enclosed, tell me if I'm wrong. I know you've been in negotiation with them around some alternate ideas to help them. Are those
I think we've
discussions ongoing?
closed-
Is that
Probably a
closed?
closed item.
Oh,
Yes,
okay,
thank
all
you.
right, fine, thank you very much.
Okay, so that's been moved and seconded. Is there any other comment, question? All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. We go to item 814, which is bylaw number 3050.01, council procedure amendment bylaw. The council gives 3 readings to the council procedure bylaw amendment number 3050.01, 2016, a bylaw to change the council meeting times from 7 p.m. to 6 p.m. and other minor housekeeping amendments.
So moved.
Seconded. Any discussion on that? Council Bruce is going to get a good night's sleep every night.
Quick call of question.
Okay. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Thank you. So we go to 815, or this is proposed new development permit with variances process. And maybe actually, Mr. Patey, would you like to speak to this, introduce the change? So it's a fairly long motion, and I'm fairly tired today, so I'm having a little trouble reading just because of that fatigue. So it's on your agenda. Everybody reads the amendment here in place. If Mr. Patey, if you'd just like to speak to it a bit.
I just think that, may I speak to this? That what this is going to do is it's
Well,
the whole
just
thing.
let Mr. Patey introduce what we're talking about, and then then if you want to comment or discuss it, then we'll do that.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Essentially, the process is to the legislation within the province allows municipalities to include variances within development permits rather than having them as separate processes. To date, the City of Duncan has been largely running 2 separate processes, one for a development permit and where variances are requested as a separate permit. It makes the process somewhat complicated. It makes paperwork complicated. It's a bit of a cumbersome process given that the legislation allows us to include them both together. So the first part of the amendment is to do exactly that, where variances are considered, where staff is proposing that they be included within the development permit. The second part of that is when development variance permits are handled as a separate application under the provincial regulations, they require notification. However, when development variance permits, or when variances are included within a development permit, variance notification isn't a requirement. However, staff feel that in some circumstances, notification is appropriate and involves the community. So we've identified 2 different types of variances. We've established what we call a minor variance, and that would be where a variance is less than 1 meter in height or less than 25% of the requested setback variance or another type of provision. As an example, if a setback requirement was 4 meters, a minor variance would be 1 meter. Anything above and beyond that would be considered a major variance, and all major variances would still include notification.
Okay.
This helps to, of course, improve efficiencies. It helps to shorten the timeline for applications. Certainly some cost with respect to timeline and expectations on the developer's end of it, and makes better use of staff resources by combining these processes. Now, we recognize that the advisory design panel up to this date has been occurring on the 3rd Monday of every month, which doesn't give any time after the meeting for recommendations of the panel to be considered by the applicant prior to bringing it forth to council. So by shifting the timeline such that the ADP meets on the 4th Monday every month, it results in a 3-week period between the ADP meeting and the next council meeting on the 3rd Monday of every month for the developer to consider implementing recommendations on behalf of the ADP.
Great.
And that pretty much wraps up the recommendation staff.
And Councillor Jackson?
No, I'm good. Thank you very much.
Good. Okay, that's well explained, and the motion is in front of you. So did we have it moved and seconded? Mover and seconder, okay. Any discussion? Hearing none, I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? That motion carries. And thank you for the work on that. That's definitely works towards our strategic plan of streamlining our development process. So thank you. Okay, so we move on to 816, 6, which is with respect to the operating reserve fund policy, and a motion that council repeal the operating expense reserve fund policy approved February 21st, 2011, and that council approve the operating reserve fund policy as attached to the September 6th report by the Director of Finance.
So moved.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor? Opposed? That motion carries. Move to 817, which is the Tourism Committee implementation of a municipal regional district tax, and the council approve a letter of support for the Cowichan Valley Regional District participating in a 2% municipal regional district tax, substantially in the form provided by the Tourism Cowichan and attached to the September 6, 2016 report from the CAO. So is there a mover? Okay, seconder. Any discussion on that? Maybe it'd be a good idea, maybe staff want to give some context in that, Mr. Durvertai?
Thank you, Your Worship. This is actually something that's been discussed for many, many years and actually contemplated in the city's tourism plan back in 2008 or 9, and then resulted in the regional district creating a tourism plan that had a lot of those same components. And this is finally that with the transition to Tourism Cowichan Society and that new board that presented here a few months ago about their transition to that new society. This is one of their first big initiatives by enacting this 2% municipal regional district tax, which is essentially the new name for the additional hotel tax. It's not per se a tax on those particular businesses. It's tourists that stay in those accommodations that are, I believe it's 4 or more units within their facility would all participate. They've gone around and gotten that grassroots support from the hotels in the valley and have already reached that mandated over 50% of the hoteliers and representing over 50% of the hotel rooms, and so it's actually quite encouraging to see this move forward. So I definitely support.
All right. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none. All those in favor? Opposed? That motion's carried. We go to reports of staff, and do we have item 9.1, which is a development permit amendment application for 545 Jubilee Street, and I'll maybe have Mr. Patey go through this recommendation.
I'm going to just pass around a sample sheet because it more accurately reflects the actual
Finish.
balance for the amendments to this application.
You can handhold that mic too, so it make it easier if you're looking back at something.
Sure. Okay, so this application represents an amendment to a previously approved development permit application. This site, I'm sure you're all familiar with the location of, is at 545 Jubilee Street. I presented on this, I believe, in April. The site currently is, or was 2 parcels with a single-family dwelling, has now since gone. Those parcels are to be consolidated to accommodate this project. We had a 6-unit project come forward on this site, and it was approved as a development permit. However, the building requiring the services of an architect required that the applicant retain those services of an architect and essentially redraw the building with that architect on board. So I'll go back actually. Here we'll see the front facade of the building. It pretty much checks all the check boxes in our development permit area guidelines. It identifies and delineates each of the individual entrances. It's a 6-unit building. The end unit has flipped its door side to face the street. You'll see it's a mix of kind of contemporary colors and materials. Now I do note that the colors in this rendering are off. The consultant that the architect hired to produce the color renderings wasn't able to truly achieve the colors that are intended for this project. The colors shown here look like beechwood. They're actually stained cedar, so it'll be a much brighter redder color, and I do provide an image further along that'll more clearly demonstrate that. This is a dark charcoal gray, and this material is vertical corrugated metal, as well as corrugated metal on each of these vertical elements in the building. And then the back piece in here is a taupe hardy panel type material. And again, cedar accents in the door and cedar stained wrap around the top portions of the building. You'll note that the cedar portions only extend on the exterior units to try to add more verticality to the interior of the building. You'll notice also that the landscape plan has changed somewhat to smaller shrub type landscape plan to try to delineate the personal and private space better than the fence was able to do in the previous application. And here we see the rear elevation, again, cedar wrapped up along the top. And again, the corrugated metal uppers with cedar accents on all the doors, balconies on each of the units, and then each of the units has its own little garage space. This fence that you see in the foreground is actually along the property line that separates this property from the property directly to the east of it. Here we see the actual color palette, and that's the one that I've passed around to more clearly show the intended colors for the building. So you can see the charcoal gray, oops, sorry. This color here is the vertical corrugated metal. This is the actual color of the back taupey gray type of color, and again, blue into some doors, red into some doors, because the doors are mixed colors, and then, you know, the natural brushed concrete for the ground, and of course, the cedar, which even in this drawing looks a little bit, or in this image looks a little bit washed out from what it truly is supposed to be. Here we see an image that I dressed up, actually, and I talked with the architect and confirmed with him that this is what he was trying to achieve in terms of representing the colors better. So you can see that that more accurately shows the stained cedar elements and how they'll be represented on the building. So a much more contemporary type of building and expression. Here we see the site plan. Now I've made note of the variances. There were a number of setback variances. These were all previously approved as part of a development variance permit 2016-02, which was associated with the development permit that was issued for this site. This building envelope was designed to fit exactly on the same site plan of the previous building, so that further variances did not need to be considered. So these, again, vary the front yard setback, side yard setback, and rear yard all remain at 1.78, 1.78, 1.8, and 2.1 meters over here. And that's to the property line that we see there. And then a parking variance, reducing it to 6 parking spaces, and 100% of those spaces designed specifically for small car. Here we see just some line drawings to kind of, I thought I would include these because the shadow effects on the images actually kind of show the amount of articulation in the building. I think they're quite nice drawings. There we see the end elevations and the elevation. This is the south elevation, so it has this doorway angled towards the street to kind of create some more street presence on 2nd Street. And this is the other end towards the lane. And here we have the rear elevation, again, just kind of showing some of the shadow effects of the building and some of the articulation of the roof line. You'll notice that this roof is a traditional roof, but has shed roof elements over each of the individual units to kind of modernize the roof line a little bit and create some undulation and some interest. So that was the previously approved original drawings. You can see that this building had more of a duplex type of look to it, with individual sort of gabled ends on the front of the building, which didn't really clearly identify each of the individual units. And that was a comment that the design panel wanted to see corrected. And that was the rear elevation of the previously approved building. There was the previously approved landscape plan. And you can see it's fairly Spartan. There's not really a lot of planted materials. There's a little corner detail, some purple trees, and very, you know, just an open parking lot to the rear. And this is accessed off of 1st Street. And then here we see the amended landscape plan. So much higher density of planting around the front edge of the site, and individual entrances to each of the units. So it kind of creates that private separation for each individual unit. And again, the same drive aisle with a little landscaping pod for each individual unit. So a much improved landscape plan. And that concludes our presentation.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, so The motion is to approve the amendment to the development permit application DP 2016-05 for the proposed development of three-story building with 6 dwelling units of 545 Jubilee Street and 211 First Street, and the legal description is in the motion. So it was moved and seconded at this point. Is it? Is it already been tabled?
No,
So I'm asking for the motion. Moved and seconded. Would you like to speak to the motion?
Yeah. So,
Use your microphone, please.
just to clarify, so that was the original, and this is what, after the changes, so these changes were made because of the ADP, or the panel, sorry, the design panel?
The changes to the overall building are the result of having to retain the services of an architect. And the architect was able to work with the applicant to achieve the vision of both the applicant and that of the architect, because every architect places their own sort of artistic expression on things that they design and build. This building specifically was designed by Jack James Architects in Victoria. But it sits on the same footprint.
Okay, well, I guess it's a personal preference, but it's totally different than the original. The other one looks like like a house, or this looks like a box with some boxes stuck on it. I'm surprised that this is the approved version, but I guess I'm not in the design. Those are windows though, right? Like the black in the middle where the black is?
Yes.
Yeah. Huh.
Okay, Councillor
Okay.
Jackson.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to agree with you. I think this is probably, again, personal preference, pretty ugly. The original landscaping plan had 7 trees. This looks like it's got a bunch of shrubs. It's very box-like. I just think I like the previous one. It was friendly. The colors were nice. The colors were warm and inviting, and I really dislike this. I'm not an architect, but I don't like it at all.
Okay, any further discussion? Okay,
Can I just get some clarity? So this is.
please, could you use your microphone?
Sorry. So, but this has already gone through all the processes. So all the people that want to sign off on it, other than have seen it, and so our design panel likes it. And
No, they don't.
Well, the process isn't that it goes back to the design panel. It achieves all of the elements which the design panel was speaking to.
Okay, have they seen it though?
No, they wouldn't.
Oh, they haven't.
wouldn't see
Okay, I was just saying I would hate for them to do all that and then come here and to come chime in at this point in it. But it hasn't been gone through that whole thing yet.
it. No, it doesn't.
It's not
It's not
going to.
required. It's at the approval stage now. This is the approval stage. Mr.
Can I
Dervitay?
just, put some clarification on that. So within the recommendation is that that we are, sorry, I'm just jumping to that one. What happened to that one? The recommendation is in this case that the original proposal went to the ADP. The ADP made recommendations. The developer made some of those and put it forward to council. Council felt at that time that it met enough of the ADP's recommendations that they would give approval. Since that time, the developer has retained the service as an architect, revised their drawings, and have resubmitted. It meets all of the existing variances that were previously provided, so it doesn't require additional variances. It just requires council's consideration as to whether this further meets the ADP or the design guidelines themselves, or doesn't. If council wishes to seek the ADP's support of these changes, you could do so. Staff believe that these changes actually more meet the guidance that was provided by the ADP in the beginning. The feedback on the previous design by the ADP was that they should delineate the entrances, that they should provide more delineated examples of the units, provide more changes to the massing, which is why they had installed posts on the doorsteps or the awnings out in front of each of the residential doorways. But again, it is subjective in nature. They are guidelines, so that is up to council as to whether you feel that these are meeting the guidelines as a group. or whether you'd rather have it go back to the ADP or even yourselves at a further committee they hold for further discussion.
Okay, Councillor Staples.
I look at this compared to being at that meeting with the design panel, and there are a lot of things in here that they have addressed, and there are more significant changes than were suggested. But when I think of the street and the different buildings on it that already exist, I like this a lot more than I like some of the ones that we've approved in the past. And I like the fact that there's variance to what's out there. There's nothing worse than walking up a street and seeing the exact same thing every 2 feet. And that was one of the things from the original design that I felt it would be more along the lines of what is already there. So I actually support the changes in this. I think it will add more interest to that neighborhood and more diversity in the buildings, and I think that that's a good thing.
Any further discussion? I'm supportive of this. My preference is toward this more modern approach in architecture today, so I do like it. I like the mixture of materials. I was disappointed with the outcome of I think it was the building across the street where it did go through our process, and it's not very special. I think, you know, some of us might be hanging on some of the developments that happened earlier on Jubilee Street, some of them that were really well executed. Since then, we haven't had that kind of outcome. I think this one's distinct enough and creates enough variance, which I think what the ADP was looking for was more significant variance in the massing of the building, and this has achieved it. So I'm going to support the developer for going along, you know, going with an architect, which they needed to do, and work together on what they both would like the outcome to be. So, okay, so I'm going to call the question on it. All those in favor then? Opposed? And Councillor Jackson opposed. We move on to item 9.2, which is the Jubilee Garden lease, and that council authorizes the mayor and director of corporate services to sign a 3-year lease between the city of Duncan and the Jubilee Community Garden Society for the purpose of operating a community garden at the property identified in all the technical ways it's identified at the north end of Centennial Park at a rate of $1 per year, as attached to the September 19th, 2016 report by the corporate services coordinator.
So moved.
Okay, seconded. Any discussion on that? Hearing none, all in favor? Opposed? That motion's carried. Item 9.3, the Cowichan Historical Society, City Hall Archives. This is the license of occupation that council authorized the mayor and director of corporate services to sign a 5-year license of occupation for the portion of the 3rd floor of City Hall for the Historical Society for the purposes of storing, maintaining historical archives and providing public access from November 1st, 2016 to October 31st, 2021, as attached in the September 19th, 2016 report of the Corporate Services Director. And a motion?
So moved.
Moved, seconded. Any discussion, questions? Councillor Horgan.
Yeah, didn't we say that we're going to put a 3-month termination of this lease in place?
This is a license of occupation. I'm not, Councillor, or sorry,
Or was
Ms.
that
Robertson?
was another part of the building that I'm getting confused with?
I think that's the basement.
This is 3rd floor.
Was
Allow Ms. Robertson to answer.
Included the 6-month clause, and actually the original one had 60 days. So we changed it to reflect council's decision of 6 months, because we did feel that if for some reason council wanted to take that space back, it would actually take more than 60 days to probably move everything. So it is included
Thanks.
in
So
there.
there's a
Thank you.
cancellation clause in there.
Thank you very much.
Any other questions? Okay, all those in favor? Opposed? That motion's carried. So we move to the Highway Park dedication ceremony and a request for budget increase. The council authorized an additional expenditure up to $200 for the conducting of the Highway Park dedication ceremony, with funds to come from either the Advisory Committee on Disability Issues or the Environment Committee reserve funds.
So moved.
Seconder? Okay. I just have to question why those reserve funds was not enough in the tourism, or?
No, I don't believe there is enough in the tourism, and both of those committees have large reserve funds, particularly the Environment Committee. And this event is it's far more successful than we ever thought it was going to be. We thought we were going to have 15 or 20 people, and as it turns out, there's 60 people have RSVP'd. So Just Jake's has offered us their van, and we have to give the van driver a bit of a, what do you call it?
Donation.
Little stipend, that's right. And we're going to have to get more food.
All right. Ms. Robertson?
I just want to ask that when council pass the motion that they select a specific committee
Select a
that they want.
specific one, because this has two options in it.
May I suggest the Environment Committee? There's
Okay.
plenty from there.
So the motion reads with strikes out the Advisory Committee on Disability
Sure.
Issues and just leaves in the Environment Committee. Everybody understand that change? Okay. Councillor Horgan?
Yeah, the way this thing has taken on its own life, is $200 going to be enough?
We believe so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any further discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. So we went on to mayor's report and council. I believe I polled council earlier, and none of them had reports. I do have a few things. I'll just keep it very brief then, because with respect to from the last council meeting, I've attended a number of other duties as board members, whether it was with respect to ICT or Island Coast Economic Trust or ABICC. I've attended a number of meetings up Island on those things. I was in attendance with other council members at the Joint Utility Board meeting, and I believe Councillor Horgan was elected chair again. Were you? And I also attended to the university just on Friday with the Couch and Fish and Game Club, who has donated $2,500 in bursary money to students wanting to attend classes with respect to conservation and fish culture and things like that. So VIU accepted the donation and are going to match it. So there'll be $5,000 in bursaries for university students going into those areas. So that's a new venture for the Couch and Fish and Game Club, and they're also going to be I don't want to jump them, but they're going to be in another location, I believe tomorrow, also providing another donation to a local group. So I also attended the One World Festival on Saturday. I didn't do the Walk of Nations because I wouldn't have made it, but I waited patiently at the university grounds over on the highway with all the other events and food set up and a stage and all those, and had a nice chat with a couple of Council elders while we waited. And the group came along with, I was told, around 125 people on the walk, and arrived, and it was a good kickoff to the festival. And Mayor Lefebvre was there, and a rep from the CDRD, and also Alistair McGregor was there as well. So and that was a good start off, and a good effort on all the volunteers of the Intercultural Society. Boy, that's a huge thing to undertake, and they did a great job of getting people there. So I'll just keep it to that at this moment. So we move on to new business, and we have a proclamation regarding Community Living Month, and the council proclaim October 2016 as Community Living Month in the city of Duncan.
So moved.
Okay, seconder. All those in favor? Opposed? And we have 1112, which is the City Hall to be lit up green on October 5th to raise awareness on the World Cerebral Palsy Day. And that is the motion.
So moved.
Okay, seconder.
Just out of curiosity, did they figure out you had a good idea about using sort of theatrical gels rather than glass? Has that happened yet, or? Okay.
Maybe whoever's responsible for going to deliver that, I can just give them the advice of where to find that because they are LED lights, so there's no issues with heat. There wouldn't be anyway with those. So it's a quick and easy way to do it, and they can't be broken, so. Okay, and did we finalize that motion? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. And question period. Councillor Jackson.
Just a quick question. I know two people who watch CivicNet all the time looking for municipal jobs, and what with Mr. Boxham retiring at the end of the month, they're not seeing his job posted. Is there a reason for that?
Well, there's a requirement we post internally first before we go to an external process, so
Okay.
we have not yet gone through those, either of those two processes, so.
Okay, all right, thank you. I'll let them know.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so I guess there would be a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Moved and seconded?
I was just, did you want to announce the amalgamation thing? Or
We did that earlier.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Peter did it in his report.
Oh, I didn't hear the money.
But I did have a question about that. Sorry.
Okay, well,
Put
if
my
you
hand
want,
up fast
we're
enough.
still in question period, so.
Okay, my question was, is there going to be a press release out about the
Yeah,
study?
you sort of stole the thunder. I think it's
Oh,
coming out
sorry.
tomorrow, so.
Okay.
There is a press release going out. Yeah.
Let's just read the paper.
No thunder, we already talked about the study.
Yeah.
We just
we're
won't give
working
any
on-
details
But you
right
can
now.
talk about
No.
The good part,
Wait for the good part.
for all
Yeah.
those people watching at home.
That's right.
Drum roll.
Make sure you read the paper.
Okay, there was a motion made to adjourn. Do I need to make it again? Or somebody make it again? Give me a seconder. Thank you. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. We are adjourned.
Fabulous.
It's 7:07. Nice.
We're usually
move,
starting,
Roger.
Roger. We'd be starting.
5 o'clock next
I
month.
tell ya, I'm super stoked about that.